So I have a quick question. How many of you were born after the year 2000? After. Okay, so there may be some references at the very beginning of this that you may not understand. The rest of you may really have seen the effects of what I'm going to be talking about. 2008 marked the beginning of the housing crash and the Great Recession. I know personally for me, my dad lost his job during that time. He was in construction. We lived right outside of Columbus, Ohio, so he did a lot of commercial construction on like Ohio State University and hospitals and the Franklin County Jail. He actually just got a job at that time with a friend of his who started his own construction company, and within about 6 months, my dad was laid off because there was just no work because of that recession. During that time, the unemployment rate hit 10%, and that means 10% of the labor force lost their jobs. That is 13.8 million people without jobs. About 10 million people lost their homes. And that's not adults. That's pregnant women. That's children. That's the sick. It's the elderly. 10 million people lost their homes. The suicide rate increased about 6%, which is more than what was anticipated with the current trends. In the United States specifically, men ages 45 to 64 had a higher rate of suicide during that time. And if we think about that, those are the ones who lost their homes, were getting into the groove of empty nesters and kids going off to college, losing their pensions and their homes and their jobs. Even today, many years later, I can't do the math in my head right now, we are still experiencing the effects of all of this. Families are still broken. From some of the research I've seen, there is a direct correlation between the opioid epidemic and the 2008 Great Recession. I watched a documentary recently about Dayton, Ohio, about an hour and 45 minutes west of where I grew up. And they talked about how, because of this time, they were a great auto manufacturer city, and a lot of their jobs went overseas because companies were more worried about a fatter bottom line than providing economic stability for their people. Millions of Americans had lost their retirement and their pensions. All of this started because of greed and a lack of government oversight over the stock market, over home lending practices. And not a single person, remember those numbers, 13.8 million people lost their jobs. 10 million people lost their homes. The suicide rate went up by 6%, and not a single person went to jail. Those that caused this, not a single person went to jail. Only one guy was actually imprisoned, and that was because he was caught cooking his books. Not because he caused any of that to happen. I like to watch movies, and one of the movies that I've watched a couple of times recently is called The Big Short, and it's about that entire time. And as I watch that, and as I remember, and as I look back at that time, and I hear the stories about how some of those practices are coming back up now, and how we still experience the effects of that time, I ask myself, Where is the justice? Where is the justice in all of this? A phrase from our psalm today, the psalmist writes, I have had more than enough. I've had more than enough of the injustice of the world. I've had more than enough of the contempt and the scorn of the arrogant and the proud in my life. When I was in high school, my senior year, I was working at a grocery store, go Kroger, and I got transferred back into the deli from the front end. So no longer checking people out, no longer bagging, no longer pushing carts. Instead, I was in the deli slicing meat. And it was a great time. And our deli closed at 9 p.m. I got off at 10 p.m. And for that hour, I was supposed to clean the entire deli. Clean and sharpen all the slicers, mop, do all the dishes, put all the meat away, whole 9 yards. Everything had to be cleaned, and it took a solid hour to do. And there's this one time, multiple times like throughout my time working back there, people would come back, hey, can I get this, can I get that? After 9 p.m., I'm like, sorry, we're closed, I'm cleaning, I got everything shut down, like, you gotta come back in the morning. Someone will be here at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay, that's fine. And they leave. But there's this one lady who came back at like 9:30, so I was halfway done. And she comes back and goes, hey, can I get this? I'm like, no, sorry, ma'am, I closed half an hour ago. Like, I got everything cleaned down, I'm mopping right now, like, I can't help you. She walks away. And then she comes back about 10 minutes later, so at this point it's about 9:40, I get off in 20 minutes, with a manager, short little guy that I've never had a good relationship with. And he just stands there and goes, you need to cut her some meat. You need to get her some cheese. You got to do this for the customer because the customer's always right. And I'm like, I'm off in 20 minutes. I got to finish, like, cleaning everything. He's like, no, you got to do this now or I'm going to fire you. Okay. So I go through and I cut the meat and I get her cheese and I do all that stuff and I hand it to her. And then I write a nice long note to my boss, my direct supervisor, Lori, and say, hey, just so you know, this manager came by, made me do this for this lady. I didn't get everything done that I was supposed to. I tried my best, but like I had to be out by 10 because I was maxed out on hours. And so when I come in a couple of days later, she stayed, my supervisor, Lori, stayed a little bit later and goes, come on, we're going to go have a conversation. Okay. So I go, and we go see the manager of the entire store. And she's like, I want you to tell him what happened. So I tell him, and he goes, yeah, he's gone. That manager's gone because that's not fair to you. And you weren't able to do your job because of him. Awesome. In that moment, I felt like there was justice. In that moment, I felt vindicated. And I could still remember the look on that woman and that manager's face, that smug look on their face while I stood there and had to cut meat for them 40 minutes after I closed. And I felt vindicated. I felt like there was justice. With this phrase of just feeling, I've had more than enough. I've been in ministry, campus ministry itself, 10 years, 9 years here at Altoona. Years before that, I had youth ministry in Southeast Ohio, and before that, I worked at a church plant in Cleveland, and before that, I was an RA, and I helped out with youth groups, and I did this, and I did that. And I remember being in positions of ministry, being in actual positions, and having the people above me look down on me because I wasn't doing things the way that they thought they should be done. Feeling the contempt and scorn and arrogance of people because I'm not doing the things that they think I should be doing, even though those practices were outdated by 50 years. And I felt like there needed to be justice. And yet there wasn't. I've had more than enough of the arrogance and the pride of people in my life. And I desire to be justified, for there to be justice for me and against them. So from there, I simply have a question. Where do we seek justice? Where do we seek vindication? The psalmist makes it clear. I look to the one enthroned in heaven. But often we probably look towards money. Maybe we look towards our supervisors. Maybe we look towards the government. Give me justice. I think of the woman, the persistent widow, who continually went to the judge and said, give me justice. Give me justice. Give me justice. Where are we looking for that justice? I was in a meeting years ago, and part of this group of people, and we're trying to figure out, like, what do we want to be called? And I'm like, I think we really need to figure out what we're about before what we are called, because name denotes function. If we can figure out what we're about, then we can figure out who we are. And I think in the same way, who we look to for justice and vindication determines what we want. And so when we look to the things other than God for that, we begin to find that we don't actually want justice, we want vengeance. We want to be right. We want others to suffer because we ourselves have suffered. Now, if you have been paying attention, if you paid attention to the very beginning of our service, Evan read our psalm for this week, for today. I have changed a word in that. A lot of what you have heard, you may sit there and go, yeah, like, I actually agree with that. That sounds good. Yeah, we seek justice. But that is not what the psalm says. What the psalm says is, I look to God for mercy. God, have mercy on us. God, have mercy on me. I think often we seek justice when truly we should be seeking mercy. When we're driving through town and some guy speeds by us, we desire justice. God, I hope you just put a cop up there, catch this guy speeding, and pull him over and get him a ticket. Where I live, there will be people who will drive one block down and be hitting 60 by the time they hit my house. It's a 25. My kids play in this neighborhood. There are other kids that play in this neighborhood, and you're doing 60 in a 25? That is too much. Where are the cops? Where is the justice? We often desire justice over mercy. But truly, how often are we looking for mercy? And what if instead of justice, we truly seek mercy? Now, here's the interesting thing. When I was praying, when I was reading, when I was meditating, when I was preparing for this message, I started off in a place of like, yes, justice. I look to God for justice. I look to God for vindication. I look to God for these things against my enemies because I am tired of this contempt and scorn of those that are prideful and arrogant above me. And then I read the psalm again, and I read the psalm again, and I read the psalm again, and I went, that says mercy. That doesn't say justice. And I looked through a bunch of different translations, and all of them are mercy and favor and gracious and mercy. And I'm like, I've missed the point of this entire psalm. And I asked myself, why did I do that? So I look up and look up and look up. What is biblical justice? And what I found in that research is that the majority of people who would define biblical justice were actually defining mercy. And so there's this disconnect in our brains for some reason where we think of mercy as justice, but we actually want justice to be something else than what people define it as. So like there's something wrong there. There's something disconnected there. The way that I would define justice is putting shalom back. Putting things back in their right place. Making a wrong right. Something that brings a moral righteousness and fairness. Justice is honorable, it is fair, it is what one deserves. It is the act of restoring righteousness. This is what justice is. Mercy, on the other hand, is compassionate treatment, a gracious imbalance. Mercy is a bridge from brokenness to righteousness. Mercy is the action of grace. If justice is making a wrong right or putting shalom back, and mercy is a gracious imbalance, the action of grace, then I think there is a play between them. That God can have mercy on us because he has been just against that which put shalom out of place, which is sin. God has been just against sin so that he can be merciful towards us. Now, church answers can go all through this. Well, how has he been just against sin? How has he given mercy on us? And of course, we can answer simply with Jesus. And I can end it there and say, we brought in Jesus, and we talked about this, and now we understand these things, and we can go our own way. But Jesus is so much more than that. 1 John 4:9 simply says that the love of God was made manifest in the incarnation. Romans 15 says that Jesus is the fulfillment of God's promises and displays God's mercy to everyone. Romans 5:8, God's love is displayed in the crucifixion. Ephesians 1, God's great might worked through Jesus and gave us union or salvation with him. Hebrews 1 says that Jesus is the full representation and glory of God. Now we can take all these things and we can put them together. And what we can say is that Jesus is the action of God. He is the mercy of God wrapped up into a person. The entirety of Jesus is the mercy of God. And we need to desire that mercy, Jesus himself, over ever being right, over ever being vindicated, over ever being justified. We need to seek the Son who sits at the right hand of the Father, who is the embodiment of mercy. We can look through some of the biblical narratives and see Jesus embodying the mercy of God. The woman caught in adultery. We can seek justice, but justice would have been to stone her to death for her sin. Instead, mercy is freeing her from her captives. We see numerous times Jesus engaging with lepers, and justice would have been to avoid them like a good law-abiding Jew. But mercy is to touch them, to give them compassion and to heal them. Jesus gives the narrative, the story of the Good Samaritan. Justice would have been to pursue the robbers, but instead he bestowed mercy upon his enemy and took care of him. This is what mercy looks like. And if we take the position of the psalmist, and we are looking to the hand of God to see him bestow mercy upon us, then truly we are looking to Jesus, the hand of God, the mercy of God. There's a book that I read recently called Rejoicing in Christ, and the author starts off by simply saying, there is no God in heaven unlike Jesus. When we see Jesus, mercy personified in him, we truly see God. And so when we see Jesus, we see God in his fullest, in his most active. If we've had more than enough of contempt and scorn, of hardship and pain, then we need to look no further than the manifestation of God's complete and perfect love, Jesus the Christ, who being the image of the invisible God, emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant, in order that through him all things might be reconciled to him, giving us a spirit of wisdom and revelation of himself, allowing us to know of the hope to which we have been called, peace with God. This is the mercy of God made manifest, Jesus the Christ. Only through Jesus do we have access to the Father, and only in Jesus is there salvation. And in him we find the mercy of God towards us, not justice. It's mercy that we should always seek. It's mercy that we should experience. In my house, we have a room. We call it the cat room because it has litter boxes. It smells all the time. And the cats have to share their room with me, and it's my office. And in my office, on the wall is a big whiteboard where I like to brainstorm and write and figure things out. If you go in there, it looks like someone had like a mental break. I'm probably working on something. But up in the top right corner, I have 3 questions. What is God showing? What is God doing? And what is needed? These are 3 questions that continually drive me. As I do my daily devotionals, as I spend time with God, as I work on things, I'm asking myself these questions. I have it as a reminder to see, God, what are you calling us into? And so as I was working on the sermon, I have given you the sermon that I worked on. I was done. I sat there and I turned around and I looked at my board and I'm like, all right, I got this, and I got that in there. And I see those questions in the corner. And I feel God show me, so what? You have all this stuff up there. You have that information. Now we all have an understanding of what mercy is, I hope. And we understand that we should desire mercy over justice for ourselves. So what? I'm a teacher at heart, so I like to sit down and give the information and say, these are what these things are, and we can understand these terms, and we can go from there. But so what? God was asking me, so what? And so he was bringing me into this place of let's do something with that. We understand this, now let's do something with it. And so I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what we can do with that mercy that we should be searching for and have received. We're all in this room together. You have experienced the mercy of God at some point in your life and has brought you to this point in here right now. So what? With the ministry that I do at Altoona, we are moving into a new direction. And that direction is finding ways to steward well the gifts that God has given us. And that's what we need to be doing with this mercy. We need to steward it well. Now, when I say steward, some of you may be like, oh yeah, I get that, and I understand that. Nah. Stewardship simply means taking care of something you've been given. I give you this gift, I give you this thing. I would like you to take care of it. Yes, it's yours to do with what you want, but I would like you to take care of it. I would like you to use it well. And that's what we need to be doing with the gifts that God has given us. Today, specifically, we need to talk about how to steward mercy well. And I think to be able to do that, we need to understand what mercy is and see where we have experienced the mercy of God. In the book of Joshua, there's this point where they cross the Jordan River and they come into the promised land. And before God closes up the Jordan that he's divided for them. He says, I want you to take one person from each tribe of Israel, go to the bottom of the Jordan River and take up a rock. Each person take up a rock. We're going to put a pile on this side. This is going to be your Ebenezer. This is going to be your stone of remembrance. This is going to be a monument that people can look at and say, why are these rocks here? And you can say, God delivered us through this river right here to bring us into the land flowing with milk and honey. I had the idea of like going out and getting rocks and giving them to everyone, but then I was like, I don't have time to do that, and I got 4 kids, and although I could have had my kids all get rocks for you, but besides the point. But we should have in our lives these stones of remembrance, these things where we can pull out and say, I remember when God was faithful. I remember when God was merciful. I remember when God did this thing. We have a rock in our front yard that we got from World's End State Park. We went there for vacation a couple of years ago. There's just this large rock that I was like, this is a cool rock. So I picked it up and we brought it back, and now it's a part of our garden. And I can look at it and say, I remember when we were there. And I remember the experience that we had. And I remember the experiences that we had as a family. We can have these stones in our lives to bring us back to this place of this is where God was merciful to me. And when we can see those and we can experience those, we can say, God showed me how to be merciful. God showed me how to be fair. God showed me how to be gracious. And then when we have that next interaction with somebody who's just kind of driving us a little bit crazy, maybe we can grab onto that thing, grab onto that stone, grab onto that memory and say, this is what God taught me to do. And in this moment, I can be that as well. I can be merciful to this person that I cannot stand right now. Because God was merciful to me when I was an enemy to him. When I was actively against him, God was merciful to me. So I can be merciful now. And I think when we begin to act like that, I think when we begin to steward well the things that God has given us above our front doors, transforming the places we inhabit by the power of the gospel, bringing the kingdom of heaven to be experienced by those around us. When we steward well the mercy that God has given us, we are actively bringing this relationship with God, heaven itself, the power of the gospel, into the spaces we inhabit, into the communities and cultures that we find ourselves in. But we need to be able to look back and see, where has God been merciful to me? Or how has God been merciful to me through other people? How have other people stewarded mercy well in my own life? How have these people shown me how to be merciful? And as we see that, and as we experience that, and as we remember that, we can move into these spaces then, where maybe we didn't have mercy for these people before. But now we can, because we've been shown how to have mercy by God and those who have stewarded well his mercy. I don't know what that looks like for you in your own specific contexts. I don't know what you're like when you're at work, or when you're with your kids, or with your spouse, or at the grocery store. I don't know. But my hope is, through those spaces, maybe someone has shown you mercy. And maybe we can find ways to show mercy to other people. I know as someone who worked in retail, worked in a grocery store for 5-6 years, time's irrelevant, I did not have a lot of mercy from people. Oh my gosh, why is this taking so long? I'm sorry, ma'am. Like, if you look around, we literally just lost power. Like, I can't bring you out anymore. I can't believe this. Really? You're not going to be merciful to me because, like, some weird thing happened? Or maybe the days that I've had a bad day and I'm not being merciful to the people that come through my line. Or having a hard time being merciful towards my college students because we sit down again and again and again and, hey, try this on, try this on, try this. Like, I want you to experience God, and here's some really easy ways to do that. And they absolutely refuse to take a single step. And I get to the point where I'm like, I don't know if I can be merciful towards you anymore, man. Mercy is hard. It's hard to take care of these things that we've been given. But it helps when we can look through Scripture, look through our own lives, look through the lives of others, and just see, how have these people been merciful, and how has God been merciful to me? And when we can see those things, when we can understand them, when we can grasp them and say, this is what God has done in my life, and I desire to bring people into relationship with God because this is how he did it for me. And I can show them this is the God of Christianity. This is the true God, the only God. This is what he's like. And we are those representatives and stewards of what he's given us. Then I think we can begin to see heaven come to earth. We can transform the places we inhabit by the power of the gospel. We can share and display the kingdom of God, which is now at